And yet another very lovely evening out there to all of you, my dearest friends. We left off with our study on the book of Nahum. Now we're coming to another one of the minor prophets named Joel. Very, very widely known prophet. Verse 1 begins, "The word of the Lord that came to Joel, the son of Pethuel. Hear this, ye old men, and give ear, all ye inhabitants of the land. Hath this been in your days, or even in the days of your fathers?" Now, before we go any further, let's just get a little bit of info on who is this Joel, or when was this writing dated? Many scholars date the book of Joel to 835 BC. This makes Joel a pre-exilic prophet, one who was before the Babylonian captivity, who served before the fall of the northern kingdom of Israel in 721 BC, and the southern kingdom of Judah, which would go into captivity in 586 BC. Joel is one of the earliest prophets. Only Obadiah, it's believed, prophesied before his time in 845 BC. Now, this would have been a very strange time for such a prophet to be alive. 835 BC was a time of turmoil and transition in Judah. At the end of the reign of the queen mother Athaliah and the beginning of the reign of King Joash. Now, these two could not be more contrary in character. Athaliah, one of the most wicked people, not just women, but one of the most wicked people whom has ever lived. And she was the queen at that time, ruling over the Jews. And then, right after her was King Joash. Athaliah seized power at the sudden death in battle of her son Ahaziah, who only reigned 1 year. Athaliah killed all of her son's heirs, all the seed royal of David, except for one who was hidden in the temple and escaped, and that was the 1-year-old Joash. That's a very traumatic time in the history of the Jews. Almost the entire Davidic line was completely cut off because of this one woman. Certainly Satan was moving through her in that action. That almost ceased the entire birth of Christ, if not for the hiding of the 1-year-old Joash. Her 6-year reign of terror ended in 835 BC when the high priest Jehoiada overthrew Athaliah and set the 7-year-old Joash on the throne. If we are accurate in thinking that Joel prophesied in 835 BC, if that be accurate, then the judgment he described came toward the end of the 6-year reign of the ungodliness under Queen Athaliah. No wonder God brought a heavy hand on Judah. One final comment. Joel is describing here the day of the Lord, a most terrible time of God's wrath. These judgments are so similar to those of the latter days that one cannot be but certain that these are ultimately fulfilled, to be fulfilled a short time before the return of Christ. It is fascinating, the prophecies that's given in this short book. Verse 3, "Tell ye your children of these prophecies, and let your children tell their children, and their children another generation," a type of tell this for all time. Continue telling, which is exactly what we're doing today, my friends. Thousands of years later, here we are still discussing what was written by this little prophet back then. It's no coincidence. Don't believe for a second this is just mere coincidence. It's 1 in a trillion to have just come about naturally. Verse 4, "That which the palmer worm hath left hath the locust eaten, and that which the locust hath left hath the cankerworm eaten, and that which the cankerworm hath left hath the caterpillar eaten. Awake, ye drunkards, and weep, and howl, all ye drinkers of wine, because of the new wine, for it is cut off from your mouth." Meaning how these locusts have devoured the vineyards. So the new wine will not be there. "For it is cut off from your mouth. For a nation has come up upon my land, strong and without number, whose teeth are the teeth of a lion, and he hath the cheek teeth of a great lion." So notice these locusts are alluded to, the cankerworm alluded to, great famine, but also a nation has come up upon my land. So this is being attacked naturally from armies, from insects. Everything is just coming upon the nation. "He hath laid my vine waste, and barked my fig tree. He hath made it clean bare, and cast it away. The branches thereof are made white. Lament like a virgin girded with sackcloth for the husband of her youth. So the drinkers of wine are being addressed first. Then comes the priest. The meat offering and the drink offering is cut off from the house of the Lord. The priest, the Lord's ministers, mourn. The field is wasted. The land mourneth, for the corn is wasted. The new wine is dried up. The oil languisheth. But the priests are told to mourn, partly because they had no work to do and could not answer to their character, the ministers of the Lord, in ministering about holy things and bringing the sacrifices and offerings of the people to him, and partly because of their want of food, their livelihood greatly depending on the offerings brought, part of which belonged to them, and on which they and their families lived. The necessaries of delights of life are all gone during this day of the Lord. The wine, as Psalm 104 says, the wine that maketh glad the heart of man, the oil that makes his face to shine, the bread that strengthened man's heart, all gone. Verse 11, Be ye ashamed, O ye husbandmen. How, O ye vine dressers, for the wheat and for the barley, because the harvest of the field is perished. The vine is dried up, the fig tree languisheth, the pomegranate tree, the palm tree also, and the apple tree, even all the trees of the field are withered, because joy is withered away from the sons of men. Gird yourselves and lament, ye priests, howl, ye ministers of the altar. Come, lie all night in sackcloth, ye ministers of my God, for the meat offering and the drink offering is withholden from the house of your God. Sanctify ye a fast, call a solemn assembly, gather the elders and all the inhabitants of the land into the house of the Lord your God, and cry unto the Lord, Alas, for the day of the Lord is at hand, and as a destruction from the Almighty. What is this day of the Lord? So many people wish to pinpoint the day of the Lord to a single day that happens in the day of God's wrath, and which they're not entirely incorrect on that, but it's really something in which is part of the visitation spoken of by the prophets in the day of his visitation. Anytime that God judges a nation like he's done throughout all of history, that's called the day of the Lord. The judgment of God then, which they were to deprecate, was still to come. All times, and all days are God's. Yet they are said to be our days in the time of peace, in which God leaves us to our own freedom to do as we will, and which we may use to repent and turn to him. These are the days, like the days of peace, that aren't of the days of the Lord. These are the days in which God were watched, were tried, were tested, proved, purged, just as when Christ himself said, O Jerusalem, if thou hadst known in this thy day, the things which belong unto thy peace, this is your day, my friend. If the day of the Lord isn't upon you, then it's a day for you to enjoy and to seek his face. That time, on the contrary, is said to be God's day, the day of the Lord, in which he doth any new, rare, or special thing, such as is the day of judgment or vengeance. It is certainly a day to pray for mercy from God. Is not the meat cut off before our eyes? Yea, joy and gladness from the house of our God. The seed is rotten under their clods, the garners are laid desolate, the barns are broken down, for the corn is withered. How do the beasts groan? The herds of cattle are perplexed because they have no pasture. Yea, the flocks of sheep are made desolate. O Lord, to thee will I cry, for the fire hath devoured the pastures of the wilderness, and the flame hath burned all the trees of the field. The beasts of the field cry also unto thee, for the rivers of waters are dried up, and the fire hath devoured the pastures of the wilderness. Pay attention to the description right here. Note how the crops are gone and the water dried up, it says. This sets in one's mind the time of the latter days judgments, when the world's natural resources are burned or poisoned, all the food and the crops, even the salt and fresh water supply. If it's not completely dried up, as will happen in the river Euphrates in the last days, if it's not dried up, then it's poisoned. All of it. There's nothing left. That day, the day of the Lord, shall come like might and essence, strength put forth by the Almighty Himself. A most terrible, terrible day to destroy His enemies, irresistible, inevitable, unendurable, overwhelming the sinners. It is a day of the most unimaginable horror, my friends. We're told about it in Revelation. Just some of the things are just beyond horrendous. I couldn't imagine being alive for a meteor to hit the sea. And it does so much devastation, blocks out the sun. And I couldn't imagine. That's just one of the many parts of his wrath that's unleashed in the day of the Lord, which is to come. Repent today, dear sinners.